Hi, good afternoon. Let me do a quick overview of the Arelle open source platform as it's usable for ESEF data, with participation from my dog who's feeling ignored. I'll review quickly the community, uses a validator, processing in ESEF, how you can integrate it, and then some of the other features in there. Our community is a couple of different areas. A number of authorities and filing providers use Arelle as an integrated component of their environment, most often for validation and in some cases, such as for SEC filings for making things renderable. The advantage of using a component like Arelle is that an XPRL producing component can gain certification by having an embedded validator component such as Arelle, which is open source. Also, it's available to the process of developing the standard. The work that Paul and the working groups do has often the need to rapidly prototype and build something to track features that are developing. As well as by being open source, it's easily accessible to individuals and academia. So what we have in there is a certified validator. In this case, what we focus on is the ESEF reporting manual and the RTS. We have complete implementation of that, but also including features for other sorts of filings. There's a complete implementation of XPRL formula, which is heavily used in EU, ZUL, which seems to be heavily used by XPRL US, and OIM, which is the upcoming format for supporting JSON and CSV. And there's a list of other kinds of authorities for which validation is provided. There's both local and server supported viewing. There's two inline viewers that have been integrated, the one by the US SEC EDGAR project and the one which open source viewer which Workiva provides. Also the US SEC EDGAR is also open source available. And there's a plugin architecture so that new authorities, new filing providers, new end users can add their features. For ESEF, there are two modes of filing. What we've been discussing so far, the consolidated reports in inline XBRL. There's also the ability to do non-consolidated reports that require a minimum sort of validation that they be proper HTML, not contain malicious code and that sort of stuff. And there is a validator provided for that. And importantly, we conform with the ESEF test suite. The most recent one came out last year. We expect a new one sometime this summer. To install ESEF validation, once you've downloaded Arelle, there's a link to the web page on it. There's a couple steps of getting it into the plugins in Arelle. There's a help feature, hopefully what I'm sharing is showing an ability to manage plugins and install them. And this can guide you through them. There's a set of interactive viewers, the Workiva and the SEC viewer. The Workiva viewer is probably better tuned to ESEF than the SEC viewer. The SEC viewer is probably important to multinationals filing their filings to both sides of the pond. And there's the ability to do desktop viewing both in the format of tables. I can get this thing to click. Not responding. You can click to get different views within ESEF, and then it generates locally both the SEC style viewing option, and if I can, all my windows are obscured by the features. Sorry about that. That's not it. And there we go, the Workiva viewer that you've seen before. For integrators, there's a number of different ways to integrate. There is command line style integration, which can also be directly called from Java and C# code. And there's a web service API, a REST type call with basically the same features, same parameters as the command line option. And the results of a, for example, a validation or a preparation of viewing is provided in terms of a set of messages, and they can be returned as text file, as an XML structured file, or as a JSON structured file and further processed. So the Java and C# interfaces are pretty simple. In Java, it's a process call and then some coding to read the results in any one of the structured formats and the equivalent features in C#. There are a number of interfaces provided to couple up tools. Javier mentioned it was important in his thing to be able to extract facts that can be extracted either in the form of tables that correspond to the schedules and statements. They can be fact lists and various sorts of views of the taxonomies. These things can be provided in any of the standard formats: text, CSV, JSON, XML. And then XBRL can be extracted in the traditional form of XBRL XML and in the newer OIM forms of JSON, which is probably, as Paul showed you on the XBRL International's webpage, JSON is probably the simplest form to process. And the CSV form, which eventually will be tabular, but that's more oriented to producing a filing. And these interfaces are usable from the desktop, either in terms of the menus of Save As or right-click saving to keyboard. So there are options to use from the menus as a Save As, and to, again, this is not responding under Zoom, to right-click for it. The license encourages use in commercial environments because it's Apache 2. You're covered for embedding it, and you don't have to get any sort of acknowledgement of embedding it. Multiple forms of integration and multiple forms of rendering. The place it's used in workflow, typically, this is the sort of thing that someone like the SEC does. A filer begins by preparing reports and attachments, and then in the case of ESEF, they're embedded in a report package. It comes into some sort of a processing that receives it and validates it, and may integrate Arelle as a component of this process. Generally, all authorities and most providers have some sort of databases, and then provide public dissemination on a website and public databases. In the case of ESEF, within Arelle, the filing is loaded into an internal object model. The HTML is mapped to XBRL elements for validation. The mapping is considered important because some of the authorities want to be able to report all of the errors against the HTML source, not against the inferred mapping to XBRL. Viewer support and rendering. Here's an example of different blocks in the SEC Edgar workflow, and the purple indicate places where Arelle might be involved. in the blue steps of the filing's progress through their system. There's also a database. It was originally based upon an XBRL abstract model, which is more than a decade ago. It was upgraded to an early version of OIM. We will eventually upgrade it to the OIM as it's in rec status, which we are eagerly awaiting and hoping will be very, very soon. And that supports multiple databases, whether your flavors are SQL, Postgres, Microsoft, MySQL, et cetera, et cetera. And that's an extensible architecture meant for people who have an underlying OIM type model, and then on top of that layer something like Edgar with all their particular metadata, or various ESEF filers and their own metadata. Finally, there's an ability to use various plugins in Arelle. One that seems to have frequent use is the ability to express a taxonomy in Excel and use that to either create a core or an extension taxonomy. So that is a quick overview. Thanks very much.